All right, we're gonna we're in the ninth step tonight, and I think we were like halfway through the category of how to make amends to the people that we hated, how to approach the man we hated. It says, and remember that there's several reasons why we're making amends. One of them is to free ourselves of the guilt that we feel for the harms that we had done others. And one of the key points we want to remember is that no one makes a conscious decision to feel guilty. Remember when we were doing the fourth step, we were talking about how the fourth step is not a search to see how bad of a person we were. It was a search to find what blocks us from God. And essentially, the way I put it is, because the ultimate service to God is to bring others to God, is the step 12 in the Alcoholics Anonymous program of action. So essentially what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get to step 12 with these steps. They're all primarily designed to bring us, and I always say to make us the best step 12 person, the best carrier of the message of the 12th step to others that we can be. And the guilt that we feel for what we had done to others is one of the things that blocks us. In the fourth step, he says that to the precise extent that we permit these things in our lives, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile because these things block us from the sunlight of the Spirit. And you know what? One of the things, my sponsor that I have now is a real religious guy, and he used the word love a lot, and he'd do the religious thing in the AA meetings, and it'd piss a lot of people off. But he was real good with the whole unconditional love and the idea of that God was the source of this unconditional love, and that you were supposed to be, as the book puts it in our third step, he says that God is the principal and we are his agents, that we are to be agents of God's power and his love and his way of life. So this guilt that I feel inside for the harms that I had done people in my life is one of the things that blocks me from being a person who can give this unconditional love, because I'm so caught up in my own head that we alcoholics are so caught up in our own heads that we can't find our way out to think. And when someone who's consumed with self attempts to do something for someone else, there is still a selfish motive behind it, and all selfish motives must be cleared away in order to get the full benefits. I think Bill Wilson had said whenever we placed conditions on our 12-step work, we found that our 12-step work fell flat because the benefits that we were trying to get, which was an inner peace, a sort of a feeling inside that we were a good person and that we were doing good things, it fell flat because there was a selfish motive behind it. So what we're trying to get to is to be able to do things for other people and not expect anything in return in order to get the full benefit of unconditional love flowing out of us and into other people. And as Bill put it in a Vision for You, he wrote, although these alcoholics, I tell you what, I'll take you out there just for a minute. It's on page 140, blah, blah, blah. No, that's employers. 155, no. This is 159. And the Vision for You in 159. And, we're sitting in here and we're trying to figure out these steps, and we're trying to implement these steps into our lives every day and live the 12 steps into our lives. And then Bill Wilson comes along and says that this is a secondary motive, that there's something behind it, that this the driving force behind. This is what he says. He says, this is like the 8 or 10 lines down from the top on 159. And, I use this because this really is one of the best descriptions of there's many places in here that he gives good descriptions of what we're doing. And you really have to cross-reference what it is that you find on one page with something you find, and try not to take it out of context. Try to keep it in the context that it was written. Because if you could take this, phrases and words in here and mix them all up and take them out of context. But the context he's telling us here is what this is all about. What are we doing here? So he says, all this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident. Remember, we're about 10 or 12 lines down from the top there. All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident, which is Bill Wilson. He's on the edge of a drink, remember? He's standing outside of a bar, and his 6 months of sobriety are up, just like mine were so many times. I'd get 3 months and drink, and 4 months and drink, 2 weeks, drink, 4. And Bill's 6 months of sobriety were over. And he says, the hotel lobby, he remained in that town. He was there 3 months. So Bill was, he was in Akron, Ohio for 3 months. So he got there when he had 6 months, and he left back to New York when he had 9 months of sobriety. He now returned home to New York City, leaving behind his first acquaintance, which was Dr. Bob, the lawyer. That's that guy in the bed, AA number 3, Bill Dobson, and the devil may care chap. These men had found something brand new in life. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. So it's essentially what he's saying there is all throughout these 12 steps is we're trying to work hard at freedom from self to put us in a better position to think of others and have genuine concern and be this agent of God and be a catalyst, or what was my sponsor always said? Conductor. My sponsor said, you are not to be the recipient of God's love. You are to be the conductor in which it flows into you and back out of you and into the people around you. What's that thing where they say you can have all the gold you want? It's a limitless amount of gold. The only catch being you got to give it all away. You know, that's back in, I think that's more about alcoholism or something. So back to, we're in the 9th step now, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to see that there are benefits of making amends. One of them is freedom from guilt. Another one is to teach our subconscious minds that there's a price to be paid when you hurt other people. You cannot go on doing things that affect other people negatively, thinking that it's water off a duck's back, that it's not affecting you in any way, that somehow the things that you have done that have affected other people negatively, you know, either they had it coming or you don't care. Wrong. This is the root cause. This is the way Bill puts it. These things are the root cause of our alcoholism. My sponsor put it real simple. He said, when you do good, you're going to feel good about who you are. And when you do bad, you're going to feel bad about who you are. It's not a matter of whether you want to or not. If you do bad things and affect other people negatively, you don't really have any choice as to whether you're going to feel good about who you are on the inside. Do you understand that? And that's what this is. We're trying, through the practice of these amends, when we find that we've harmed somebody and we make these amends, we're trying to teach our subconscious mind, because remember that we're dealing with the human mind, the thoughts in our human, the things that we do that lie below the level of conscious thought. And it's easy to see back in step 4 where he's got that third column where he says the part where it affects my. He says that I was angry with Mr. Brown. The cause was he's paying attention to my wife, and it affects my security, my personal relations, my ambitions, my self-esteem. And the reason he's got that third column on there is to see that what's happening is that he feels threatened by what Mr. Brown is paying attention to his wife, and he's not making a conscious decision to get angry, that he's being threatened. His self-esteem, his security, his personal relations and ambitions are being threatened by something someone else is doing, and he's reacting to it. And that's essentially what anger is. No one really has control over any of their anger or our fear or our guilt. Those are the 3 most common manifestations of self that block us from receiving and doing God's will, which is a life of sacrifice for others. Okay, and all those words come from the Big Book. It's just that I've put them together in the way that I've come to know that best describes what it is we're doing in here. So we are on page 70. We're on page 77 at the bottom. We'll try to get through. Remember, we started. There are 6 categories of amends. There are, in the order that they are, hated, owed money, criminal offense, marital, family, and never fully right. Wrongs we can never fully right. That's 6 different categories of how to make each one of these different types of amends. And we are now in the pages, there's like 2 pages here, I think. Let me see. No, that's probably one whole page of how to approach the man we hated. Last week, if you'll see in the middle of the page on 77, it says about 4 lines down in that second big paragraph there, it says, the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. And that's the beginning of the directions on how to approach the man we hated. We got down to the bottom of this paragraph last week, where he says, we go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. So right there, he's telling, there's three of our spiritual solutions in that little, that little sentence right there. Forgiveness, confession, and making amends. Right there in the in that one little sentence. So here we go. This is where we left off last week. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply we tell him that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell him what he should do, his faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. And that's pretty much the explanation of what it is we're doing. We'll be gratified with the result means that we're going to feel better about ourselves, that an attempt to free ourselves of the guilt will be felt. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own faults, so feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. And that's the end of how to approach men that we've hated, or the person that we've hated, whatever. And this next paragraph is most alcoholics owe money. This is the second category, or the second type of amend, owed money. It's not rocket science. You try to pay them back or something. Most alcoholics owe money. We do not dodge our creditors. Telling them what we're trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us, arranging the best deal we can let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. And you have to ask yourself, why is it that I'm going to drink if I don't pay these people back the money that I owe them? Because remember, one of the best descriptions that he has about these 3 most common manifestations of self is back in the angry, the resentment list, where he says, we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? I'll tell you what, I'll take you to it and show it to you, because if you're not familiar with it, you just me telling it to you off the top of my head is probably not a good. This would be on like 66 at the bottom. The bottom of 66. And what I'm getting at here is he's going to tell us that this guilt that we feel, no matter how much you want to get rid of this guilt, it cannot be gotten rid of without the spiritual solution. And we'll get into that a little bit in just a minute here. He says at the bottom of this page 66, now what he's trying to tell us here is that we're dealing with, as Bill put it in Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, we're dealing with the behavior of the subconscious human mind, the things that operate below the level of conscious thought. We don't make a conscious decision to get angry. We don't make a conscious decision to feel guilty, and we don't make a conscious decision to be afraid. Okay, these are all sort of a human. You got a guilty conscience type thing. You ain't got no choice in the matter. If you're a relatively normal person. At the bottom of the page there, he says, "How could we escape?" I'm about 6 lines up from the bottom. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? Question mark. we could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So you see how he's made a reference there, almost all the way back to step 1, and making a connection between anger and alcohol. He says that we saw that these resentments must be mastered because they're at the root of our alcoholism. But how are we going to master these things? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So what he's telling us, and this is the same thing with guilt and fear, and we're dealing with the guilt right now, and you have to ask yourself, okay, so let's say I've done something that has hurt another person adversely, or I owe money, as we're reading right now, that part where he says we've got to pay this money back. And why is it that if I owe money, it may make me drink? Because I'm going to feel guilty about owing somebody money and not paying them back. And that guilt is going to block me from receiving and doing God's will, which is unconditional love and outflowing love towards others. And I will drink again. There's a up in the middle of this page here, there's that whole paragraph in the center of the page where he says, "It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment." Now, this paragraph is dealing with anger once again, but it's the same basic principle for fear, guilt, and anger. All three of these things, as Bill Wilson puts it, they are the most common manifestations of self, and from these most common manifestations stem all others. Okay, so by bringing these three under control, all the other forms of selfish, self-centered behavior will follow and then be into their rightful place. And this paragraph is an explanation of why these things must be gotten rid of. And he says, and you know what? Even when I tell my sponsees to work these steps, I throw that in there. I say, he says, "It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment," I say, "fear and guilt." It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment, fear, and guilt leads only to futility and unhappiness. And to the precise extent that we permit these things, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. Resentment, fear, and guilt is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. It's fatal to harbor this guilt, okay? For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. So that's the basic idea behind not just forgiveness to get rid of anger, but now we're dealing with, in step 9, making amends to get rid of guilt. When harboring these feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit, and we drink again. When he says we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit, he's essentially saying that it's going to be there's a really good description of this idea out in step 11 where he says, when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Yeah, I tell you what, I'll take you out to it. I got to stop doing that, just trying to throw things at you off the top of my head. This is on page 86 at the bottom of the page. Now this is how to pray in step 11, where he says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve. And this is on the bottom of that paragraph, which says, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. This is the 11th step prayer. It is not... The hell was that?
That was the nuclear siren.
Oh.
The bomb you were talking about before.
Sounded like a gearbox going through the gears or something. Anyway, now this is the 11th step prayer here, and you know many people confuse what's his name, Saint Francis of Assisi, as the 11th step prayer, which it's really not. This is. And on the bottom of that paragraph where he says, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead, we consider, in the bottom of that paragraph, he says, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. That's a very intense statement right there. When you say to yourself, my thought life will be placed on a much higher plane. Which plane is this? The plane that we're trying to get to. We're trying to get closer to God. We're trying to develop a relationship with God, and we're trying to be, what did he say in the third step? We're trying to be an agent to go out and sell God as the principal. We are to be agents of God and his emissaries, whatever you want to call it. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane, more along the plane of God's plane. You know, no one should be so arrogant to think that they'll ever get there, but we're trying to. You understand? We're making some effort. And then he says, when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Remember, for an alcoholic, what's wrong with us? Wrong for an alcoholic is selfish, self-centered self-will. and right for an alcoholic, the correct thing is God's will. And those are the two opposite ends of the spectrum that we're dealing with in Alcoholics Anonymous. That self-will is all the way on this side over here, and it's what's wrong with the alcoholic. And God's will is all the way on the other side of the spectrum, and that is what's right. So, when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives through the application of these spiritual solutions, it's the spiritual solution of forgiveness when we are angry, the spiritual solution of making amends when we've harmed other people, and when we get out to step 12, that's the spiritual solution of faith in God. That essentially, faith in God is the result of working step 12 in a daily, program of recovery and bringing others to God. So, the idea there is that we're trying to get through here is that we're trying to clear our thinking of these wrong motives, these guilty motives, okay? Back to page 78, was it? 70, where was I? 78, yeah. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them, okay? Now, this next paragraph is, actually, it's more than that paragraph. It goes all the way, it goes for the next two pages, actually. This is a criminal offense. But I think he transcends into another area on this other side about the general amends, okay? Perhaps we've committed a criminal offense. This is category 3, or classification there. This is the third classification of amends, criminal offense, which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried but haven't kept up the alimony to number 1. She is indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble, too. All these reparations take innumerable forms. Now, this little paragraph is telling us, in general, what these amends are about, and he's given us he's given us directions to ask God in a prayer to help us with this. Remember when we were going over spiritual solutions back in 6 and 7, actually 5, 6, and 7, all throughout the last 2 or 3 steps, we've been discussing the difference between spiritual solutions and human solutions. Human solutions are any type of solutions that do not include God in there. And spiritual solutions include these 4 aspects in all cases. They include, it's more easily seen in the 5th step. In the 5th step where he says we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And the action of that admitting is the 4th one, is action. So we got, in all the spiritual solutions, like faith in God. In order to have faith in God, there must have all of these elements. Myself, another human being that I'm going to do something unconditionally for, and God is who I'm going to make contact with God through this action. You see, one of the things I've learned over the years is how close you feel to God is not a matter of sitting down and trying to think your way, where are you, God? I'm trying to think my way to you. Where are you? It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of what you do with your life. How close you feel to God is going to be in direct proportion to what you do for God. What you do for God is going to be your action. And in the faith in God, there's just myself, there's the person that I'm going to do something for unconditionally with no conditions on it, and there is God because he's the one I'm trying to get to, and there's the action of doing this act, okay? All 4 aspects. In making amends, there's myself, there is another human being that I'm going to make amends to, and here in this paragraph he's going to tell us to ask God for guidance and direction, and then there's the action of making the amends. So spiritual solutions have these 4 aspects, and other solutions, any other solution that doesn't have all 4 of these aspects is a human solution, and human solutions fail to go as far as we need them to go, as people trying to have a spiritual experience. So he says, although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding, reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. And here, and when he says we ask that we be given strength, is a direction to turn to God for help with this. And I believe it's a reference backwards to 6 and 7, because if you'll think about it, 6 and 7 are the steps in which we turn to God and say, please remove this from me. It's essentially, please remove this guilt from me, and then we set out on the action to make the amends, okay? We ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing. So you have to say, who are we asking? Well, we're obviously asking this higher power on a higher plane. No matter what the personal consequences may be, we may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. Usually, however, now this is the except when to do so would injure them or others paragraph. Okay. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. I use an example sometimes of someone who, let's say, like he was talking about, you padded the expense account. So let's say there was a big jar of petty cash at the office or something, and two people reached in there and cleaned the thing out one day of $200 or $300. And one of these two people says, I'm going to come clean. I got to free myself of the guilt. And he steps into the office and he says, I had something to do with the missing petty cash. I was the one that took it. And if you include this other person who's not ready to come clean about stealing the money, then what you're doing is you're making more amends for the future. You're trying to clean up and feel free of the guilt, and you're going to feel even more guilty, or not more. You're going to bring up more guilt associated with saying something about this other guy who didn't want to come clean on it yet. Maybe in another year or two he might say something about it, but he's not ready right now. So we can't create more guilt in trying to get rid of the guilt we're trying to get rid of. You understand? That's what he's trying to tell us here. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life and secured a position and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. Before taking drastic action, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission and consulted with others, ask God to help. So there's another reference to 6 and 7, asking God for help. And one of the things over the years I hear people say, and I try to bring this up as much as possible, is some people make a reference to asking God to remove these defects of character, and then they're magically gone. And to me, that's not the directions that I read when I read this book. You can clearly see where he says, we ask God to help. And there's another place, and forgiveness. We're asking God to help with these amends. We're not asking God to do it for us. We're not saying. So if you're asking God to free you of guilt, and the only way to free myself of guilt is to make amends, then how is it that I ask God to free me of the guilt and don't make amends and I'm free of it? It's not. You have to have the action involved. And so what you're saying here is essentially that God is going to help us be free of self. He's not going to do it for us. And I always make a reference to like a new car. You say, hey, God, will you give me a new car? And then you just sit down and wait for it. He ain't going to get you a new car. But if you go out and go to work and you save your money and you get some credit line built up or whatever, and it's a little work involved there. And so too does it say this back in the directions for how to forgive. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And back in the third step where he says we could no more be free of self than we could women. That was the resentment thing. This is in the third step on page 62. Yeah. He says, above everything else, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us, and God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid, not without him doing it for us, not without him magically just poof, removing it from us. And at the bottom of that paragraph, he says, neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. So, back to where we were. Ask God's help, and the drastic step is indicated. We must not shrink. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. He felt that he had done a wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than to stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. So there's the idea right there, the guilt thing. Because nowhere in here does he actually say we're trying to be free of guilt. But there stands the normal mind of the, a normal person would ask, what's the big deal about making these amends? Why is it such a big deal around here? Because it's the guilt that we're trying to get to. So he's thinking it would be better to risk this, this humiliation and being discredited than it is to carry this guilt around, because he's saying, well, I'm going to feel guilty for doing that, and then I'm going to end up drinking, and then everything I'm trying to protect's going in the toilet anyway. So it's better to take this and deal with it as it comes than to put it on a shelf somewhere. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again, and all would be lost anyhow. Okay? So anyway, we got one more little sub-paragraph, and then we get into the marital, and we'll start there next week. He says, he attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. His action, there's another word for us, action met widespread approval. And today he is one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. So we got that idea of action and the God's help. We ask for God's help. So the chances are that we have domestic troubles. That's the beginning of how to make amends, marital amends, like to the wife. All right, so we're going to open the floor for open discussion. Anyone who would like to give us any insight into the ninth step, anything? One of those promises of the ninth step is we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And I always say, and what situations is he talking about? He's talking about the situations in which we feel angry, the situations in which we feel guilty, and the situations in which we are afraid. We will intuitively know how to handle these situations because we're going to practice these spiritual solutions in all of our affairs, and we're going to teach our subconscious human mind that it's in our best interest to put the welfare of others ahead of our own. Remember what he said out in A Vision for You. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. Anyway, we got 20 minutes for open discussion. Who would like to share something tonight? Any insight into the ninth step, making amends? Anybody? Nobody? Any questions? Hey.
I'll share. My name's Tom. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Tom.
You really did a good job there. I liked what you had to share about it, especially with the spiritual aspect of it. And I just I think about how I was when I first came here, and how all this stuff just went right over my head when I came to my first year worth of meetings, but in the beginning, I heard the words, the action, and everything leads up to the 12th step, and they go in an order, and that kind of a thing. And the biggest thing for me was discipline and doing something that I was told that I didn't want to do, including going up to somebody and saying, I'm sorry, whether I had a resentment or not. All this stuff was new lingo to me. It was like learning a new language when I came here. Even the word resentment was foreign to me. So I had a long way to go, but I'm grateful that there was guys like you who sat up there and explained line for line what this stuff means and how to go about it and what is the benefit. That was the biggest thing for me. What am I going to get out of this? I meet with this guy and I talk to him every week and tell him how I'm doing, and he's telling me about the first step and the third step, turn my will over. What is my will? And I was lost. And I had good people in my life who held my hand and taught me what it was about, and eventually things started to click. So, the most important thing for me was to establish that discipline in the beginning. Make a decision to myself that I was no longer gonna bullshit myself anymore, and that I was gonna give this program an honest try. And that's when I started to feel better. And I could tell you today that I know what you're talking about the faith in God, and how good that feels, and how good it feels to not have to worry and start a job and not have to have anxiety or fear over, am I gonna work out, is it gonna work out, or am I making the right decision? I know that things are exactly the way they're supposed to be today, and that's a mile away from where it was 6 years ago when I came into this program. I was a mess, and just the level of serenity that I have today to then, like I said, is a mile away. And at the time, I thought all of this stuff was just something to keep you busy so you don't have to drink. Sit around and read the book for an hour so you don't have to be at the bar for that time. That's how shallow my thinking was at that time. Now I'm open to it, I'm tuned into this stuff because it works. It's very, very good design for living. It really is, and that was the only reason why that has happened for me is because I got out of my own way. Thanks for letting me share.
Hey, Tom.
What's up?
My name's Tom Alcoholic. I like what you shared. Not only is it a different way of talking, like you said, I like that. It's a different way of living. It's like when it says here when we go to an ex-wife to make amends. Excuse me the way I talk. When we go to make amends, we can go to an ex-wife to make amends, to give her money, and not be afraid. We lose fear of other people. What is that promise? We lose fear of people and an economic insecurity. And it's a whole different way of life, and we can go. We don't have to be afraid of nothing. And I have another disease called MS, so I talk funny every time. And it's really cool because when we get rid of all this stuff that blocks us from the sunlight of the spirit, we get so much strength. We can do anything. Thanks for sharing. That's all.
Alcoholic and Colin.
Hey, Colin.
Doug, man, I like what everything you had to say. I've got my my step 8 list completed. I'm waiting to go over it with my sponsor about the last week, but hopefully we'll get together tomorrow. I'm looking forward to doing the amends. If a horse is going to get uncomfortable, I am looking forward to getting fiance was down over the weekend to see her family in CD, and it was a really good visit. You know, I thought I lost her forever. I love her to death. We've got, we lived together for 6 years. You know, we made a nice little life together, at least seemed like it, except for everything I was doing, but I'm slowly kind of making my amends, just living amends with her, and she's coming around, we're taking it slow, and I think things are gonna turn out well as long as I keep on the right path, but I've got an opportunity every March we go to Hilton Head together. She travels for work, and, it's basically an all expenses paid trip to Hilton Head, airline tickets, hotel, and food and all that stuff, so we go every year, but she asked if I would go with her in March, and, her family I know would not approve of. And, cause her family, you know, they're scared to death of letting her go back to them and stuff. Especially if they found out we were sneaking away, which, you know, in the past I would've just said, well, let's not tell your family, let's just go to Hilton Head. Go to Florida, I'll meet you there, and really, they don't need to know, but I know that's not the right thing to do, I can't do that this year, so I'm trying to figure out, what do I do? Do I get in, you know, on a Southwest flight, go to Baltimore, and try to make these amends just so I can go to Hilton Head? Cause really, I wanna go with her, you know, this is my first opportunity to, you know, this would be the first opportunity for us to spend the night together and really, you know, spend some quality time together. And, but I know what I shouldn't do and what I can't do, but at the same time, I know this is something for my sponsor I gotta talk to him about, but, you know, I don't know if I should be impulsive, jump on a plane and get up there and spend a weekend and go over amend, you know, try to make my amends with her family just to go on this trip, or just accept the fact that maybe I shouldn't go on the trip. There'll be plenty more trips if I, continue the way I'm going, we'll have plenty more chances to do it. So, I know it's not a quick process, like you can't get them all done, it's a big timeline, it's, I think what they call a sponsor step, right, is that, you know, I need to consult with my sponsor, he needs to tell me when and how and if I should do it. So, I guess I'll wait for that, but, you know, that's all I got.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks.
Yeah, Ron, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Ron.
Ron.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, I think, the reason, let me first say, you know, I stopped having the urge to drink a long time ago, but, I have difficulty with these steps, you know. I think, you know, when we're young, we learn to build up walls and stuff and all. We learn not to be vulnerable, so we don't get hurt and we don't get abused by this world, because, this world will abuse you, you know, if you let it. I find it's against my nature to show any weakness, you know, or to show anyone that they're getting to me. And I think to properly work this step, you really have to let your guard down, and you know, you have to kind of make yourself vulnerable, you know. There was a reading in one of the stories last night where an old timer told a guy, you know, that he would trade his 30 years for somebody's 30 days because it's the journey. And, you know, I think that's where I'm at. But I'll tell you, man, I might have to hear this stuff for 10 years before I'm able to get this, because I just cannot let my guard down. I don't ever want to be in a position to be hurt again. And that's what I see coming if I, you know, I don't know, maybe you can set me straight on this, but I know I'm just gonna have difficulty with this one.
Hey.
My name's David, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Dave.
My concern is similar to yours. You know, like, I've never done an 8th or 9th step, before. think of relationships, friendships, or broken friendships, that, you know, there are wrongdoings on my part and on the other person's part, and maybe they're teeter-tottering, you know, not really sure who's more at fault, and I'm okay and comfortable with the idea of cleaning up my side of the street. And then I think of the ones where, you know, the wrongdoing that was inflicted on me just completely, you know, outweighs any wrongdoing on my part, but there was some wrongdoing on my part. And I guess the fear is that, you know, I mean, some of the only comfort that I can take is that, you know, perhaps this other person, you know, has a guilty conscience, and that, you know, at least they know that God is their witness, you know, if nobody else, and by making amends and receiving none, I'll be more injured than I was in the first place. Maybe I'm wrong, you know, and that's probably why the steps are in the order they're in. But I have to admit, I think about it, and I know that when you forgive somebody, it's not a validation of what they did. It's a gift for yourself, you know, rather than a gift for them. And I can intellectualize that and understand it on some level, but I don't know. This is gonna be tough for me when I get to it, whenever it is. Just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Dave.
Time for one more. Somebody wants to say something. I will say one thing. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that if someone's thinking about asking someone else what they should do in any given situation, we were instructed to ask God what to do. And remember that we're trying to get a new relationship with God. And if we make mistakes on our path and we have a sincere desire to become a better person, then those mistakes will be learned from. But if you make mistakes and don't care whether you made a mistake, then you don't learn anything from it. And another aspect is, and this is one of the most important ones, that what we're dealing with here is ego deflation and humility, which are essentially the same thing. And you have to ask yourself, if you've got one human being who's telling another human being what he should be doing with his life in any situation, it might be different if I said, well, you know, if I was in that situation, this is what I would do. But I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life. This is between you and God. I will help you turn to God. So I'll help you see how you are instructed to turn to God for help with these things. Because you're trying, like it said, we will pay for these with all sorts of absurd ideas and actions, and we will find that as time passes, our thinking will be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We will gradually begin what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. In other words, you're going to get better and better at it through practice, like some kind of Olympic swimmer. They don't go swimming one day and they're an Olympic swimmer. They've been practicing for hours and hours and hours, and that's what you are to do with amends, as long as you're on the right path and you have the right idea. And the other idea I was saying was, one of the things Dr. Bob said was it is imperative that we wean these sponsees, these people that we're working, these pigeons, off of our support as quick as possible and onto a God of their understanding. Because it's just as unhealthy for me to tell you what to do as it is for you to be told what to do by me. Because I'm trying to essentially submit my will to God and come before my God and say, you are the God of this world. Without you, I am nothing. And then I turn around with my ego and go, I know what you ought to do with your life. You follow my direction, and wait a minute. This is about God, not another human being. So that would be more along the lines of human solution. Remember what we were saying, where's God in there? There's no spiritual solution aspect. But anyway, we will pick up where we left off in the domestic troubles. It says, it doesn't say marital, it says domestic, but that's a reference to wives and ex-wives or whatever. But anyway, could I please have 8 volunteers clean up after the meeting? And we need a volunteer to hand out the chips. Oh, wait a minute, the promises of the 9th step. Who wants to read them? What a coincidence, we're on the 9th step tonight. Yeah.
Promises the 9th step. We're painstaking about this phase of our development and will be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we've gone, we will see how our experience can benefit.
Page 80. We're on page 80. Middle of the page, somewhere in there. After consulting with his wife, the third full paragraph from the top. So we were reviewing, why are we making amends to people? Because in the 3rd step, we made a decision to turn our lives over to the care of God. And what we're looking for, in the words of the 4th step, we're looking to find what blocks us from doing God's will. And in the search to find what blocks us from doing God's will, we went through the list on it. Resentment was the number 1 problem, and we went through in 6 and 7 that forgiveness is the spiritual solution to resentments. We made a list of the people that we had harmed, which was usually that same list of resentments, and maybe some of the people weren't on there, and there were some extra people that were, but give or take, it's usually the same names. And remember what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get to a place where we can be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And this was on the previous page, or maybe that was 2. This is on page 77 at the top. This is a description of what we're doing in the 9th step. It says at the top of page 77, at the moment we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. So that's what we're looking to do here. And the question might be there, how does making amends for something that I've done that's harmed another person allow me to put my life in order and to be of maximum service to God and the people about me? And the idea is not actually in these pages. The idea, the way I understand it, has been handed down by word of mouth, and that is, it's a simple matter of thought and deduction. You say to yourself, well, there's several reasons why we make amends. One of them is to free ourselves of the guilt that we feel. And based on the idea that guilt is one of the most common manifestations of self that blocks me from being, as Bill Wilson put it, an agent of God's outpouring of love. I'll take you to the 3rd step, and we'll look at the 3rd step prayer and see that on the 3rd step prayer, he says, this is page 63 in the middle of the page. Now, this 3rd step prayer is a pretty good description of what we're trying to do with our lives. And by making amends, it's going to put us in a better position. When you go out to step 11, Bill Wilson writes, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Okay, and the idea behind making amends is going to clear our thought life of wrong motives being selfish and self-centered ones. In the middle of the page, he says we were now at step 3. Now remember, this is the 3rd step prayer, but it's given us a pretty good description of what we're going to be doing with our lives. We're essentially going to be an agent of God's outflowing unconditional love to other people. We're going to be we're going to be an example of God's love. We're going to be one of His agents out there doing His work. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood Him, God, I offer myself to thee, I'm going to say you, because that's kind of creepy, that thee, thou stuff. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and do with me as you would. Relieve me of the bondage of self. And that's what we're talking about here, is that in this making of amends, we're going to be relieved of one of the most common manifestations of self. Anger, fear, guilt. These are the three most common manifestations of self, and from those three stem all other subforms, okay? So what we're looking to do is be relieved of the bondage of self, and in that process, we bring God into this thing. And in the 9th step, he says we ask God to help us. You know, I'll take you to that page in a minute. But remember that the spiritual solutions differ from human solutions because human solutions don't include God. And in these spiritual solutions, we're going to have all four of these aspects of ourselves, God, another human being, and the action involved. And in the making of amends, there's myself. I've wronged somebody else. There's someone else that I'm going to be making amends to. There's God. I'm going to ask God to enter into this, and I'll show you where that is. And it's probably on that page we were reading at the top right there, or we started on 80. And then there is the action of making those amends, okay? So relieve me of the bondage of self is a description of what we're trying to do right now. Remember, at the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. And this is why should I be relieved of the bondage of self? That I may better do your will, take away my difficulties, and the difficulties being the most common manifestations of self that block us from a life of sacrifice for others, okay? That victory over them, victory over these most common manifestations, these difficulties, the most common manifestations of self, will bear a witness of those I would help, of your power, your love, and your way of life. So this is essentially what we're looking to do. We're looking to get rid of what blocks us from being an agent of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. May I do thy will always. Back to, what page were we on last? Hell, I'm on 82 somewhere out there. Okay, so we were on 77. We're going back to page 80 at the top right there is where he says, ask God to help. Before taking this at the top of page 80 real quick, and this is the part where this spiritual solution includes God, and that's the difference between spiritual solutions. And remember, like in step 10, Bill Wilson points out, he says, we have begun to become God conscious. To some point, we begin to feel the nearness of God in our lives. We begin to feel that God is actually there with us. And this is part of the reason why, is because during the implementation of these spiritual solutions, to be free of the most common manifestations of self, we are bringing God into our lives to help us with these things. And at the top of the page, he says, before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, ask God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. Ask God to help. That's one of the places, but there's 2 or 3 different places in here. On page 79, at about 9 lines down, about 8 or 9 lines down from the top of 79, he says, reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing. That's another reference to asking God to help us with these amends. So these amends are not something that you just run out and start doing. You're going to ask God for help with these things. But back where we left off on the 3rd full paragraph on page 80. And real quick, one of the things that we're trying to get from these amends too is we're trying to remember the promises of the 9th step amends. One of them that may best fit the point that I'm trying to make says, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Now you have to ask yourself that question. Okay, so there used to be a situation that used to baffle me, and in this particular situation we're talking about the guilt that I feel for what I have done that has harmed other people, whether I lied to them, stole from them, or hurt someone in some way that has made me feel guilty about what I've done to them. So how will I intuitively know how to handle those situations? Through the practice of making amends. When I harm other people, I'm going to teach my subconscious mind that there's a price to be paid. Essentially, I'm going to be teaching myself that I cannot continue to hurt other people with immunity from my actions. That it's not just something I go, that they had it coming. That guy's an asshole anyway, or whatever, whatever the situation may be where you say something along the lines of, they had it coming, and I'm not making amends for it. But now you say to yourself, well, I don't know where it's coming from, but every once in a while I get this urge to pick up a drink, this obsession, and I can't fight it, and I pick up a drink and I'm drunk again. Where does it come from? And what we're saying in Alcoholics Anonymous is that it comes from a lack of thinking of other people and a lack of doing things for other people without expecting conditions on there. We're saying that it is a lack of a nearness to our Creator. Remember, he says, we have been trying to get a new relationship with our Creator, to discover the obstacles in our path. These are some of the ways that we describe what it is we're trying to do here. And during the process of making these amends, this is the point. If my mind, without ever having to be told, knows that there's going to be a price to be paid, if I hurt somebody tomorrow, I'm less likely to set out to do it. You understand that? What I'm saying, and a lot of the things in here that we're dealing with are all things that operate below the level of conscious thought. That nobody makes a decision to be angry about something. You react and you're angry. And nobody makes a conscious decision to be afraid. When we're dealing with fear, nobody sits down and says, I think that this is something that I should be afraid of. And so what we're trying to do is, I'm trying to get into my subconscious human mind and reteach it how to intuitively handle situations which used to baffle it. That I don't have to sit down and think to myself, should I lie to this person, or should I steal something from them, or should I do something that hurts enough? I don't have to think about it. I go, hell no, you don't. You may drink over this shit. You may stand there one day with a beer in your hand going, what the hell happened this time? I got a beer in my hand again. So by heading this off at the pass on the premise that, as my sponsor used to say, if you do good, you feel good. If you do bad, you feel bad. What does an alcoholic do who feels bad on the inside? We turn to the instant courage. What do you call it? I don't know what else to say other than when I feel bad on the inside, that's where the obsession for the first one comes from. Let's say I got 2 months of sobriety. I've just gotten out of the rehab or whatever, and I am not caring about other people. I still lie, cheat, and steal. Well, the chances are you're going to drink. That's all there is to it. So I'm trying to teach my subconscious self that there's a price to be paid, and how it starts off as making amends. By making amends for what I've done that's harmed other people, I will teach myself in the future, without ever having to stop and think about it. It'll just be there. I will intuitively know how to handle that situation. Go, hell no, don't lie to somebody, steal from somebody, cheat from somebody. This is the root cause of your alcoholism. It's the chief block between me and God's unconditional love, outflowing love to other people. Is my most common manifestations of self, being guilt being the one we're dealing with now. After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than to stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. This is where we left off the last time we were going over this stuff. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again, and all would be lost anyhow. On the premise here, remember what he's saying. If you don't free yourself of the guilt for what you've done, then all is lost. And he saw that he must place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again, and all would be lost anyhow. He attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. His action met with widespread approval. There's that word, action. Remember, the 4 aspects of the spiritual solutions are God, ourselves, another human being, and the action. And human solutions don't usually have one of those, they have the God thing missing there. Or any one of them, actually. His action met widespread approval, and today he is one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. Now, this is the next category. That category we were just reading was hated. No, that was criminal offense. That was criminal offense category. The category we're here now is the domestic category, which is marital, obviously, your spouse or whatever. And this marital section goes for about 2 pages. Let me see, where's family? Anyway, so we'll read this. This is the chances are we have domestic troubles. And these next few paragraphs are dedicated to explaining how to make amends for domestic harms or wrongs. Perhaps we are mixed up with other women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt if, in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, or uncommunicative. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he is having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. Quote, in fairness, we must say that she may understand. But what are we going to do about a thing like that? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he is married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. Whatever the situation, we usually have done something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She will want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. We are sorry for what we have done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. So that's part of the amends there, is it shall not be repeated. So it's kind of like if you say you're sorry and then you go out and do it again, where's the sorry, And that idea that he's talking about right there is the idea of except when to do so would injure them or others. So I know it's a big controversy, and I've had arguments with other people, but I do believe that we are instructed to lie. Because anything less than the whole truth is not the whole truth, right? So we are instructed, when it will protect somebody else, we're instructed to not tell the whole truth. And like I say to other people, I say, well, you're splitting hairs now, ain't you? You're not telling the whole. By omission, that's still a lie. You know that if you tell somebody something and leave a part out that's an intricate part, an important part, that omission is a lie, and that's all there is to it. So we are instructed, in my opinion. And like I said, I've had arguments with other people who are very smart on this particular topic, and I believe, and I stand on the side that we are instructed to lie because it will keep from creating more damage as we go along. Because, like he's saying, if he told his wife where this woman was, what her name was, she'd probably want to go out and beat the shit out of her or talk to her or something or whatever the hell. And she didn't have anything to do with it. She just got cornered by him somewhere. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. So he's almost saying we have no right to throw this other woman's name in there, or man's name, or whatever. We are obligated to lie almost. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this the best course to take. Our design for living is not a one-way street. It is as good for the wife as for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with the most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem may be attacked on the flank rather than risk a face-to-face combat. And that phrase he used there, the most terrible human emotion, jealousy. And whenever you turn the news on and you hear about somebody shooting 2 or 3 people, and it's almost always something along those lines, Jealousy is, as he put it, the most terrible human emotion. And this is where the end of that marital situations ends, and this next paragraph is family. If we have no such complications, there's plenty we should do at home. So this is the beginning of the 5th category of making amends, family. And this goes to the middle of the next page. Top of the next, maybe the middle, the second paragraph of the next page there. If we have no such complications, there is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Certainly, he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents for whom years he has so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. I often think, and maybe a lifetime, how will I ever make amends to the family members I hurt? It'll never finish. Like the 10th step, it's the 10, 11, and 12. You never say, well, I'm done with them. It's a lifetime. You'll spend the rest of your life making amends. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. So you see, these are directions that are very important. And when you see something like being careful not to criticize them, you don't want to just breeze right through something like that. You want to stop and think to yourself, while I'm making amends to my family, I don't want to say to them, hey, it was partly your fault too, Because remember, we're trying to clear up our guilt, not affix blame for any of this stuff. We're trying to get closer to God. One of my favorite passages by the guy who taught me was that this is not an indictment of how bad of a person as you have been. When we're out there making amends, we're not saying, hey, look at you, look what you did to these people. What we're doing is we're saying, I'm trying to get closer to God. I need to find what it is that's blocking me from being closer to God. And that's what this is. This is a search to find what keeps me from doing God's will, not an indictment of how bad of a person I have been. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are their own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. The spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. All right, we'll stop right there, and that'll give us 30 minutes for open discussion. We'll pick up on, this is the next paragraph. That's a paragraph that I have circled as wrongs you can never fully right, such as dead people or someone who is on the other side of the world, someone who's in Bangladesh or something, and you ain't going to Bangladesh no more. But there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. I always categorize that as, for me, my experience was people that have died, and you can't make amends to someone who's died. So, but you see, you still have to get rid of that guilt. So we'll go over that next week, and that is that the willingness to make those amends will go a long way to freeing us of the guilt. And I know we're breezing right through a lot of these directions, and if you come across, what I tell some of my sponsees is, you're supposed to be taking your 4th step and taking one name off of that 4th step and saying, Okay, so here is one of the names on my fourth step of somebody that I had harmed. Which one of the categories in the ninth step amends does this fall into? Was this a hated, a monetary, what was the other one? Law related, family, and marital. Which one of those categories does this amend fall into? And find that area, those 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs which describe how to make that amend, and use that as your guide to help you make those amends. Because remember that this book was written by people who was written by Bill Wilson, actually, and his ability to comprehend, it must be far greater than mine, obviously, because he's got stuff in here that's just so condensed, like the idea that we must be careful not to criticize them, and although their actions are partly responsible, we're there to make amends for our actions and free ourselves from our guilt, not to affix blame. Been doing that for years. But so we got like one more category of alcohol, one more category of amends, and then the promises, and we'll get to step 10. We might make it to step 10 next week. And step 10 is only like 1.5 pages, but it might take a little longer because explanations. So remember what we're doing. We're trying to get closer to God, and we believe. One of the things I've come under criticism around here lately is someone making references to actually, knowing God's will and talking to God and listening to God. And to me, I may use those phrases, and about when you get to step 11 where it says you pray only for the knowledge of God's will for you, and, hey, is it coincidence that it's step 11? You still got one more step to go. And the way I've experienced it is, in step 11, he says that our thought life will be clear. Our thought life will be on a much higher plane. This is what he says. Our thought life will be on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. And on that idea, when you see in a vision for you, he says, if your house is in order, the right answers will come. Now, he may be talking about helping others, but I think he may be also talking about the entire program of Alcoholics Anonymous. If your house is in order, the right answers will come deals primarily with what answers are you looking for? What do you want me to do, God? That's one of the most glaring answers that we're looking for. What does God want me to do? And you're not going to get, like 10 Commandments. You're not going to get a burning bush with some voice coming out of it telling you, go do this. You're going to be taking your best educated guess based on the people that have gone before you, given their advice to you, and you assessing which one of these, you say you get 3 or 4 conflicting or even agreeing points of view on what to do with any specific matter, like God's will. That's a simple one. What does God want me to do? And when you come across like Bill Wilson's idea of in the third step where he says, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will, that victory over them will bear witness to those I would help. So that's essentially what he's saying in there, that God's will. Of those I would help, of your power, your love, and your way of life. It's essentially, so when you come across something like that and you say to yourself, okay, so I got this idea, and then there's the angry what's-his-face comes in here and says, they're strapping bombs around their waist, and God tells them to go blow themselves up in a pizza parlor. And you say to yourself, well, is that God's will? Does God want me to blow myself up? You understand what I'm saying is it's easy to determine once you get away from the selfishness and the self-centeredness, and you get away from your anger, you get away from your fear. Through the spiritual solutions, you find your anger, apply forgiveness. You find your fear, apply faith to it. You find your guilt, you apply making amends to it. And as it says in the 11th step, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane. Remember, the 11th step says, we pray for one thing and one thing only, the knowledge of God's will for us. And so therefore, the answer that you're looking for is more likely to be the unconditional outpouring of love towards others that we're trying to find our way to. And that's the purpose of the 12 steps. And that's the purpose of the spiritual solutions. That's the purpose for the whole shebang. I mean, what is the 12th step? The 12th step is essentially that I sit down with one other person and do my best to help them find their way to a God of their understanding. And that is like the purest form of unconditional love in AA. That's the purest form of humility, of an admission that I am not God, that by trying to bring others to a God of their understanding is proof positive that I no longer feel that I am in control of anything. It's the way I've experienced, the way someone else explained it to me, and it's the way that I've experienced it. It is the purest form of ego deflation, humility, unconditional love. It's all based in step 12. And that's what we're looking to get to is helping others through the 12 steps. And that's what we're saying when we're trying to get rid of the guilt in the 9th step is this is one of the things that is blocking you from helping others through the 12 steps. So we'll open up the floor we got plenty of time. I don't know where our 2 little buddies are. I guess they weren't up for the steps tonight. Hey, Ralph. A little past the middle of the page, and remember that there were essentially 6 types of amends. I was taught 5, but I come up with I count 6 with the one that we're reading tonight. It's that one paragraph where it says there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. I've called this the category of amends we can never fully right. Obviously, just like the paragraph as they start, whereas the marital paragraph starts out as the chances we have some domestic troubles, perhaps we've committed a criminal offense, most alcoholics owe money, the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise, and these are the types and the categories of amends that we will be making as we set out to clean up the wreckage, the guilt and the shame that we feel for what we had done to other people out of selfishness and self-centeredness. And remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find what blocks us from God and to be free of what blocks us from God, which is that we be, in the words of the 3rd step prayer, relieve me of the bondage of self, which is what we believe guilt is, one of the most common manifestations of self. Relieve me of I'll read it for you so I'm not like ad-libbing it. I got it memorized, but not word for word. It says, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. And this is what we're looking to do with making these amends here, is we're looking to be relieved of self, that I may better do your will, God, and take away my difficulties. And these are the difficulties that we're asking God to take away, is the guilt that we feel inside. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them will be a witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. So we're looking to be an agent of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. And what's keeping us from doing that is the most common, in the words of the 4th step, the most common manifestations of self that block me from being a selfless, giving person who, whenever you do something for another person, if there's a condition behind it, a condition like if you don't stick to my ideas and my plan, I'm not going to help you anymore. If you don't show your appreciation, I'll never do anything for you again. Or I bring it to some of the real-world applications that I've seen where some of the sponsors that I've seen sponsoring people say, if you don't call me every day at a certain time, I'm going to fire you. If you drink, I'm going to fire you. You see, that just completely nulls the idea that you have done something for another human being and expected nothing in return because you placed conditions on it. Selfish, self-centered conditions. And the idea is that when I do something for another human being and I place no conditions on what I do for another human being, that I receive a benefit of how I feel inside about who I am as a person. And this is easily seen out in the chapter of Vision for You, where Bill Wilson writes, though these men knew they must stay sober if they were, he's talking about Dr. Bob, Bill Dobson, and the Devil May Care chap, as he puts it in that chapter out there. He says, though these men knew that they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive becomes secondary. It's a secondary motive. Helping other people and putting no conditions on it is a secondary motive, and it is transcended by the happiness they found in giving of themselves for others. Essentially, in a real-world way of putting it is, when you do something for another person and don't place any selfish, self-centered conditions on it, you get the benefit of feeling good about who you are inside as a person. You understand? And the same in the opposite form of that. If I'm always selfish and self-centered, and I'm full of fear, I'm full of anger, and I'm full of guilt for the things that I've done to other people, so too do I feel that way inside. My sponsor used to say it is this simple. He's a real religious guy, and he said, when you do good, you feel good. When you do bad, you feel bad. What does an alcoholic do who feels bad? We know how to feel good. Alcohol. You understand? That's exactly what's happening to us, is we develop an obsession for the first drink based on how we feel inside about who we are. And once the detoxification is done and you have gotten away from the alcohol and the drugs, it becomes a matter of that first drink coming back into your life, on the premise that there is a underlying cause and condition that drives me to the first drink. An obsession develops in my mind, and I give in to that obsession eventually, and I drink. And we combat that obsession with a life of selfless self-sacrifice and doing for others to make us feel better about who we are on the inside. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous works. And Alcoholics Anonymous making of amends is to be free of any guilt that I feel, and it's also to teach me through the process of the story of the cat on a cold stove. I don't know if you guys have heard that. Through the process in the promises, he says, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And that's a reference to that I automatically know how to do this, right? My brain, I don't have to stop and think about. If I intuitively know how to handle this situation, then I don't have to stop and say, well, you know, if I lie, cheat, and steal from somebody or treat somebody poorly and put conditions on what I do for other people, I wonder what will be the outcome of that. You see, you don't have to stop and contemplate something like that. You will automatically know that if I lie to somebody, there's a consequence to be paid, and that consequence is I may develop the obsession for that first drink, and I will have no defense against that first drink. So what we're doing by making amends is, number one, we're clearing away the guilt that we feel for what we've done to other people, because that's what blocks me from being a conduit of God's outflowing of this. What did he say? That would be a witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. This is one of the things that's blocking me from this. In the 11th step, he has a statement that says, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Is a reference to the idea that my motives, being selfish and self-centered, they just nullify anything that I do for other people, because it becomes one more selfish act by me, okay? And when my thought life is cleared of wrong motives, which are selfish, self-centered motives, through the process of making amends, these wrong motives are that I do something for somebody else because I want something in return from them. That's a wrong motive. And when he says our thought life will be placed on a higher plane, he's talking about closer to God's ideal, like in the third step, where he says, may I take away my difficulties, that victory over them will be a witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. Okay, so we're going to read a couple of paragraphs here, and I'll open up the floor for discussion, I don't know, about 5 after or something. This is in the middle of page 83. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. Now, if I can't make amends for the wrongs that and I'll give you an example for me, it would be like my aunt and my grandparents. They saw me in the throes of, they were some of my favorite people in the whole world, and they saw me in the middle of, actually it was the end of my addiction, and it was not a pretty sight. I was obviously not the person they intended me to be, and for me it was a sad thing that they died never seeing me get sober. How can I make amends to those people? I'll never see them again. So he says there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. But if in my heart I say to myself, you know, if those people were here, right now, I would make amends for what I did to them, stealing their money, lying to them, cheating things out of them. If they were here right now, I am positive that I would make amends to them, because I know that it's in my best interest. I may drink over these things, right? And that goes a long way. But because of the fact that I can never make these amends, you can never be completely free of the guilt, because you don't know. But it goes a long way. Being willing to make the amends goes a long way to freeing you of the guilt. If you say to yourself, you know, look what he says. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would write them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter, and there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. And these are obviously the promises of the ninth step. We read them all the time. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. Now you have to ask yourself, how is it that all these things are coming true in my life when I'm making amends? What's the connection here between making amends? Because I'm being free of the guilt that I feel for what I've done to those people. And these are what he's saying is the result of being free of that guilt that I'm feeling inside. That I lied and stole from the people who cared about me the most. And I make amends for that and never do it again, obviously, And it frees me of these things. And no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. Here's a couple of them that I think are the best ones. We will lose interest in selfish things. Why is it that I will lose interest in selfish things? Because I see that this has been my number one problem. And I also, over the years, I have been given the benefit of feeling what it is that you get from doing something for somebody else. That the inner peace that he's speaking of, we will know peace. This is coming from knowing inside that I honestly want to be a better person. And I'm going to prove this to myself by learning from my mistakes and never, lying and cheating and stealing in the future. The cat on the cold stove theory, it's a stupid story I heard probably 15 years ago. And the cat jumps up on the counter, he walks across the stove, steps on the hot burner, jumps up and tears out running. A week later, cat's cruising through the kitchen, jumps up on the thing again, and he jumps back down and goes around the stove. The stove's cold, though. He doesn't care because the last time he got burnt, you see, he knows I have taught my subconscious mind that there's a price to be paid for lying and cheating and stealing and hurting, and I intuitively know how to handle those situations in the future. I don't do it because I paid the price for it. If you don't pay the price for what you've done, then there's much more likelihood that you're going to do it again because you haven't really learned the lesson. A lesson learned, you know what they say, a lesson learned is a lesson earned. Or is that the other way? Lose interest in selfish things, gain interest in our fellows. Why would I gain interest in my fellows? Because I know that this is what I agreed to do when I offered myself to God back in the third step. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. How is it that my whole attitude and outlook upon life will change? Because as a process of the steps, I understand that I was a selfish, self-centered person, and even when I thought that I was doing something for somebody else, I really had a selfish motive behind it. That I hid a selfish motive behind a selfless one. That it looked like I was doing something for somebody, but it really, in the back of my mind, in the back of the whole deal, there was a selfish motive behind it, and it canceled it out as a selfless act, and I never got the benefits from it. That I was promised benefits from doing things for others, I just didn't know that there was a selfish motive behind it. And that whole attitude and outlook upon life will change is based on the two opposite ends of the spectrum of being a selfish, self-centered person and a selfless, self-sacrificing person. This is the whole idea behind recovery. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. Well, fear in general is what's going to leave us because the way we're taught in the steps that fear is the reason behind anger. Fear is the driving force behind anger, and anger is the number one offender of alcoholics. Fear is obviously at the root of fear. And when you're talking about making amends, I never would have harmed those people if it wasn't because of fear. Fear is at the root of all the harms that I did when I lied, cheat, and stole. I would never have lied unless I feared the consequences of being honest. I would never have stolen unless I didn't fear the reasons that made me steal. I was afraid I wouldn't have what I wanted in my life. I was afraid I wouldn't get what I needed. Fear is at the root of all of this. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. That's a good one. We will intuitively know. That's an idea that one of the things that Bill Wilson writes about recovery is that we were born of psychiatry and medicine and religion. And one of the things that Bill writes is that psychiatry is the study of the subconscious, the inner workings of the subconscious human mind. Remember, if we have a full frontal attack on our alcoholism, it's doomed to failure. No amount of attacking alcohol head on will get us sober. We have to come around on the flank, on the backside of it, and attack our alcoholism from a underlying cause and condition standpoint. That there's something that drives us to that first drink, and that once you've been detoxed in the hospital or the jail or whatever form it is that has gotten you away from it long enough to get it out of your system, it becomes a matter of combating it with the idea that there's an underlying cause and condition. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Obviously, that's about the first drink. Are these extravagant promises we think not there being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly? They'll always materialize if we work for them. Now, step 10, we'll just do another paragraph or two here because there's a lot of stuff in here. This step 10, you could take this next paragraph and spend the next 2 hours looking at it and analyzing it and going over and over the last. Actually, when you read this next paragraph, what you're really reading is a summary of the last 20 pages. Page 64 is where the fourth step starts. This is page 84. That's 20 pages that you've just gone through. Step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are 6 steps, which together become one step in step 10. Okay, all 6 steps of 4 through 9 become one 6-part step in step 10. The difference being that steps 4 through 9 are to clean up the wreckage of your past, and that same process is going to be to clean up the wreckage every day as you go along. And the as you go along is the words that he uses here for when to do step 10. So he says this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests that we continue to take personal inventory, step 4, and we continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So remember, when we did the fourth step, we found in the words of the Big Book the most common manifestations of self that block us from God's will, which is a life of sacrifice and work and sacrifice for others, is what the way he puts it. To set right any new mistakes as we go along, we vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered the world of the Spirit. So let's stop right there and say we have entered the world of the Spirit. How is that I am at this step 10, and I really didn't see much in there that was about entering the world of the Spirit. And the first thought that I'm having is 6 or 8 people sitting around a table holding hands with a crystal ball in the middle with candles burning, and they're all holding hands, and they're trying to get together and find out where the dead Uncle Harry buried the money or something. Where do you hide the money? It's a seance-like thing, or some kind of connection between the world of the dead people, wherever everybody comes from and wherever everybody goes when they're not alive, and the world where we are, which is where we're alive. And I'm trying to think, where's the spiritual connection that I'm going to have to this other world? But that's not how it works, you see. The spiritual connection, he says here, we have entered the world of the Spirit. And how that is you stop and you go back over the last few steps and ask yourself, oh, wait a minute, where in these last few steps did I actually enter the world of the Spirit? In what we call the spiritual solutions, which are forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God, and admission. And the 5th step, the admission. Those 4 spiritual solutions are a working daily part of our lives right now. When I'm angry, we go back to the 4th step and say, okay, I found when I'm angry, and I know that the anger is blocking me from being an agent of God's outpouring love and his way of life and his power, okay? So in the process of being free of anger, I bring God into the process, and I say, I write down who it is that I'm angry at, what it is that I'm angry about, the part of my life that it affects. In step 5, I share it with another human being. I ask God to remove it in 6 and 7, and I direct my attention to how I can be of help to these people. How can I be of help to the people that I'm angry with? And the actual act of being of help to them is the 4 parts of the spiritual solution of myself, God, another human being, and the action. And that's the same way when you look at step 5. It says we admitted to ourselves, to another human being and to God the exact nature of our wrongs, and the actual admission is the action. In step 8 and 9, when we're making amends, there's myself, the person I'm making amends to. I'm bringing God into it to ask him to help me to figure out what to do. Remember, we went over that paragraph back in step 9 where he says we ask God to help us. I forget exactly what his words were. But anyway, in each one of these spiritual solutions, we bring God into there. And human solutions are any kind of solutions that don't bring this spiritual aspect in there, where I turn to God and say, please help me with this, God. What do I do? How do I make these amends? And then I set out in the action of making the amends. And in the faith in God, faith in God is essentially, we haven't gotten there yet, but we have reviewed some very detailed explanation, and like in the 2 paragraphs in step 4 where he says, perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we're now on a different basis. These 2 paragraphs are explaining step 12, but they're in step 4. We've gotten some idea as to where we're going with this. Remember that all 12 steps, sole reason for existence is to bring you to step 12. Step 12 is the reason you make an inventory. Step 12 is the reason that you admit these things. Step 12 is the reason you ask God to enter your life on a daily basis and help you deal with these things. Step 12 is the reason for making amends. It's the reason for the daily inventory of step 10, because you're looking to get what's blocking you from being an agent of God's outpouring and unconditional love towards others. In our rooms of recovery, this is in the form of step 12. You understand? That as a recovering alcoholic, I dedicate my life to helping other recovering alcoholics find their way to a God of their understanding, and I place no conditions on that, and I get the benefits of feeling better about who I am as a person. There are many other aspects of giving of yourself to do things for others, but the primary form in Alcoholics Anonymous that it takes in here is to dedicate your time to helping other people. And from that, you get an inner peace, a feeling of being a good person, and that's essentially what this boils down to. And when he says here, we have entered the world of the Spirit, that's a reference to the fact that we're practicing the spiritual solutions in our daily life, and we're bringing God into these most common, the spiritual solutions to be free of the most common manifestations of self. Let's read on what he says here. Our next function after steps 4 through 9, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Understanding and effectiveness at what? Obviously, we've just been through the inventory and the spiritual solution aspects. So this is what we're going to grow in understanding and effectiveness, and how to do the inventory and how to apply the spiritual solutions in our daily life. This is what we're looking to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. When you finish the 12 steps, you're not finished with the 12 steps. It's like brushing your teeth or taking a shower. You don't say to yourself, well, I took a shower 10 years ago when somebody showed me how to, so I never do that again. I brushed my teeth back in the 70s once, and I never do it again. This is a daily thing that you have to do every day to keep and to keep this thing going. Your next, this is not an overnight matter. It should continue for your lifetime. That you will be doing this inventory and these spiritual solutions every day for the rest of your life. Continue to watch for, and this was what we learned in 4th step. We continue to watch for selfishness in the form of dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Okay? Now, those are the most common manifestations of self, from which all the other manifestations of self stem. That's what he said back in the 4th step. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. That's in step 6 and 7. In 6 and 7, we're instructed to ask God to remove our defects of character. We discuss them with someone immediately in step 5 and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone in steps 8 and 9. And this is a reference to step 12, where we're going with this. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts towards someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So real quick, in almost like 8 or 9 lines, he has given us the last 20 pages wrapped up in a nutshell. How to do steps 4 through 9 quickly. Okay, we'll stop right there, and that next line is the promises of the 10th step. That's like the next 2 paragraphs. We'll start there next week, and we'll open up the floor for any open discussion we're going to have tonight. Any points of interest is remember that we just went through all 6 steps, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. The idea that we have entered, in the 10th step, we have entered the world of the Spirit. And it's not some creepy thing where we're all sitting around. It is something that takes place in this world right here, in our action, primarily. And what we do with our lives on a daily basis is how we enter the world of the Spirit. It doesn't take place with some connection with the other world where all the dead people are at, okay? The directions for when to do step 10 are like the third line down. As we go along, he says, continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. That's when we do step 10. I think in the 12 and 12, he calls the 2 different ones a spot check inventory and a daily inventory, which the daily inventory is step 11 in this book. We have the 11th step inventory. We do the same inventory and the same spiritual solutions at the end of each day. So next week we'll pick up on the promises of the 10th step down there where he says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. There's some pretty matter-of-fact things in there. Anyway, we'll open up the floor for open discussion. We got like 20 minutes, 22 minutes, whatever. Anyone who would like to share or ask any questions, I'm game for. I don't know where that no crosstalk thing comes from. It's in none of our literature does it say that there's no crosstalk in an AA meeting. But some people think that it creates fights and stuff or whatever. But I've been in meetings where we have questions and answers. I'm pretty game for that. If you'd just like to share what you know about the 12 steps with us, or anything that you'd like to share that's bothering you, or raise your hand at any time. Hint.